Something silent, yet profoundly transformative happens when we begin to look at life not merely as a collection of external facts, but as a vibrant field of possibilities that responds to consciousness. Often we grow up believing that reality is a rigid stage, where only physical forces and circumstances dictate the course of events. However, as we expand our perception, we discover that there is a subtle layer in which intention, presence, and attention shape the unfolding of events in unexpected ways. It is in this territory that the idea of a quantum consciousness begins to reveal itself, not as a distant theory but as a living experience. Imagine for a moment that each thought is a wave cast toward the unknown, and that the way we look at the world changes what the world gives back to us. This hypothesis, though challenging to the logical mind, becomes tangible when we observe coincidences that seem more than mere chance, or when an inner shift produces external transformations with no apparent explanation. The question is not whether this exists, but how willing we are to investigate without ready-made answers. The invitation is simple: to make room for trust to become a daily practice, even in the face of uncertainty. To trust not as a blind act, but as a posture of exploration, where each sign may carry a hidden meaning, each encounter may be a key to learning, and each silence may reveal something that was previously unseen. As we dive into this field, the strange becomes natural, and the invisible begins to take shape before us. When we think of the mind, it is common to associate it only with the incessant flow of thoughts, worries, and memories that make up our daily lives. But there is a subtler, almost forgotten dimension that turns it into something beyond a logical tool. The mind can be understood as a portal, a passage between what we call external reality and the invisible fields where new possibilities await access. This portal is not physical, but it operates silently at every moment, modulating what we are able to perceive and even what we are able to create. If we look carefully at human experience, we realize that we rarely distinguish perception from interpretation. The reality each person lives is not only what happens out there, but the way the brain organizes, colors, and gives meaning to what arrives through the senses. What we call the world is, to a great extent, the reflection of what we can capture, and above all, of what we believe is possible to capture. That is where the mind ceases to be merely a passive record of reality and begins to function as a creative filter, almost like a lens that shapes the very landscape we see. Modern physics has already pointed to something curious. The mere observation of a phenomenon alters the way it manifests. This finding is not limited to laboratory experiments. In daily life, it translates into something similar. What we choose to focus on begins to come alive, while what we ignore tends to dissolve into the shadows of the irrelevant. If we focus on failure, for example, we see signs of defeat at every corner. If we cultivate the possibility of success, paths that once seemed non-existent begin to appear. This is not magic, but a real dynamic between mind, attention, and world. The portal that is the mind does not open automatically to all places. It opens toward wherever the energy of attention is directed. In this sense, each recurring thought is like a beam of light illuminating a path, and that path tends to become more concrete the more we walk it. The brain, with its plasticity, reinforces circuits according to how frequently they are activated. Thus, constantly believing in limitations creates neurological trails that sustain the same pattern, while allowing oneself to imagine new possibilities begins to carve out alternative routes. It is possible to notice this in small daily practices. Upon entering a room full of strangers, a shy person may immediately see signs of rejection or threat. Another, more open person may notice opportunities for connection and acceptance in the same environment. The space is identical, but the mental portal selects different realities. The mind works as an interface that decides which version of the experience will be accessed. This process, though invisible, has tangible consequences in the life each one builds. There is, however, a delicate point. The portal is not always under our conscious control. Many of the filters we use to see the world were installed very early, inherited from family, culture, and painful or striking experiences. They are like hidden programs running in the background, determining what we can or cannot see. When we realize that these filters are not immutable, the chance arises to reconfigure the mind so that it becomes a portal of expansion, not of repetition. This process does not require an immediate revolution, but a careful act of observation. Noticing one's own thoughts without fully identifying with them is the first step to realizing that the portal can be reprogrammed. By observing the mind, we create a minimal distance that frees us from the tyranny of the automatic. It is in this space of observation that the possibility opens to choose which doors we want to cross. Think of an ordinary morning. You wake up, and before even getting up, your mind already projects scenarios of difficulties. Bills to pay, tight deadlines, difficult conversations. If nothing interrupts this flow, the whole day tends to align with this expectation of tension. Now imagine that at that very moment, you can pause and simply witness the thoughts without feeding them. Just notice that they are there, like passing clouds. This simple change opens another door. The body relaxes, the breath deepens, and suddenly space arises for different possibilities. The external world may be the same, but the quality of your experience changes because the mind chose another portal. Thus, the mind is not just a repository of ideas or a stage of memories. It is a natural technology that connects the visible and the invisible, the material and the potential. The more conscious the use of this technology, the more the horizons of reality we can access expand. It is no exaggeration to say that much of what we call destiny is in fact the reflection of the portal we choose to cross at each moment. There comes a point on the inner journey where the desire for control begins to show itself insufficient. The mind, accustomed to seeking guarantees and predictions, encounters limits when confronted with the complexity of life. At this moment, the possibility of something different arises: surrender to the unknown. This surrender is not resignation nor passivity, but a posture of openness in the face of what cannot be predicted. It is an invitation to inhabit the space between certainty and chaos, recognizing that life unfolds beyond our capacity to calculate. Many are frightened by the idea of not knowing. The unknown is often associated with danger, loss, or failure. However, when we observe calmly, we realize that everything that truly transforms us arises precisely from this territory. Birth, the most meaningful encounters, the decisions that changed the course of our history. Almost always they arrived wrapped in uncertainty. The unknown is fertile because within it lie the possibilities not yet limited by our logic. When we trust this field, something greater can manifest. To surrender to the unknown is like crossing a bridge without seeing the other side. Each step requires courage, but also trust in one's own journey. The curious thing is that the more we try to control the path, the narrower it becomes. And the more we let go of the need to predict everything, the more paths emerge. This apparent contradiction reveals the dynamic nature of quantum consciousness. The collapse of possibilities does not happen only in the microscopic universe, but also in human experience, at the very moment we stop imposing a fixed script and open ourselves to being surprised. In practice, surrender begins in small gestures. It is when we stop resisting an uncomfortable emotion and begin to listen to it as a messenger. It is when we suspend judgment in the face of an unexpected situation and choose to observe before reacting. It is when we allow a conversation to follow its own flow instead of rigidly steering it to where we think it should go. These moments of openness create gaps through which the new can enter. The difficulty lies in habit. We were conditioned to believe that security only exists when we know exactly what will happen. This belief, however, generates rigidity and anxiety, because life rarely obeys our plans. Surrender does not eliminate fear, but teaches us to walk through it. When we accept that the unknown is part of the very essence of reality, the tension it provokes turns into creative energy. There is an almost poetic quality in learning to trust the invisible. It is like planting a seed in the earth. We do not see what happens beneath the soil, but we trust that in due time something will sprout. The process of surrender works in the same way. We plant intentions, cultivate presence, but do not control the outcome. Trust allows the unexpected to become an ally, not an enemy. The most intriguing part is that, when we surrender, signs begin to appear that previously went unnoticed. The unknown ceases to be a threatening void and reveals itself as a field full of clues, connections, and subtle directions. Small encounters, phrases, or coincidences become guides, as if reality responded to our willingness to trust. What once seemed like chance begins to acquire an unexpected coherence, as if there were a greater intelligence weaving the invisible threads. This posture requires continuous practice. It is not about abandoning all forms of planning, but about cultivating flexibility in the face of what escapes control. It is a balance between intention and surrender. We set a direction, but accept that the path to it may be different from what we imagined. This balance reduces anxiety and increases the ability to perceive opportunities that previously went unnoticed. By surrendering to the unknown, we access a kind of silent wisdom. Suddenly, the body begins to give clearer signals, intuition grows stronger, and life seems to speak to us in symbolic language. It is as if a hidden layer of reality opens up, not because we discovered an intellectual secret, but because we relaxed the need to control everything. What was once seen as a threat reveals itself as a space for expansion. Deep down, this surrender is an act of trust in oneself and in life itself. It is the acceptance that we do not need to have all the answers to move forward, and that uncertainty is not an obstacle, but part of the creative process itself. By inhabiting the unknown, we learn to dance with impermanence instead of fighting against it. And in this movement we discover that the strange can become familiar, and the unexpected can reveal itself as precisely the path we needed to follow. Many of the limits we perceive in life do not come from external factors, but from silent convictions that inhabit the unconscious. These hidden beliefs function like invisible scripts, guiding our choices, shaping our perceptions, and defining what we believe is possible. They take root throughout childhood, fed by family experiences, by culture, and by the interpretations we give to events. We grow up carrying these ideas as if they were absolute truths, without realizing that in many cases they are merely frozen interpretations of past moments. The power of hidden beliefs lies in the fact that they operate outside the reach of direct awareness. When something goes wrong repeatedly, we tend to attribute it to fate, luck, or circumstances, without investigating what is happening within us. However, a large part of these repetitions is born from the same point of origin, a fixed idea about who we are and what we deserve. If someone from an early age absorbed the notion that they are not worthy of affection, they may sabotage relationships without realizing it. If they internalize that success is dangerous or unattainable, they will find ways to push away opportunities before even trying them. These beliefs act as filters in the portal of the mind. They not only influence what we see, but also determine what we ignore. When we believe something is impossible, we do not even notice when life places before us signs that it may be viable. It is like wearing sunglasses in a dimly lit room. Part of reality simply disappears. And the more we cling to these ideas, the more we reinforce the cycle of repetitions that confirms what we believe. The curious thing is that the mind rarely distinguishes between a true belief and an inherited belief. Both operate with the same force until they are questioned. The questioning does not occur only at the intellectual level, but above all at the experiential level. It is by noticing the recurring patterns in our emotions, in the choices we make almost without thinking, that we begin to perceive the contours of these invisible ideas. As they take shape, they cease to be absolute laws and become hypotheses open to revision. A simple example can illustrate this. Imagine someone who, for years, believes they are not capable of public speaking. This belief may have been born from a comment in childhood, from an experience of shame at school, or even from a comparison with someone else. During adult life, this conviction limits job opportunities, restricts social interactions, and generates anxiety in situations of exposure. The belief silent acts as an invisible barrier. However, when this person gives themselves the chance to observe their own fear without running away, they realize that the difficulty is not a natural law, but a conditioning. Little by little, new experiences begin to erode the power of the original idea, revealing that the limitation was sustained only by the strength of the belief. Quantum consciousness shows us that reality is not static. If the world responds to the way we observe it, then hidden beliefs become even more decisive, because they guide our gaze even before we consciously choose where to look. They are like invisible programmers of our field of attention. When we do not recognize them, we repeat the same scenarios over and over. When we bring them to light, we have the chance to reframe the way we relate to life. The process of revealing these beliefs requires courage, because many of them are guardians of old wounds. To question them means touching painful memories or challenging narratives that have supported our identity for decades. But it is precisely in this confrontation that liberation arises. Every time we discover a hidden belief and examine it in the light of awareness, we make room to choose again. It is like wiping a fogged mirror. Suddenly we see the reflection clearly and recognize ourselves in a more authentic way. This inquiry is not just a psychological practice, but a spiritual exercise in the deepest sense. It means realizing that life is not entirely determined by what we have inherited or by what we fear. It means accepting that we are capable of reconfiguring the invisible structures that shape our perception. By doing this, we access not only new ideas, but new ways of being. What once seemed impossible begins to show itself as plausible, and what seemed like inevitable repetition dissolves in the face of the clarity gained. Hidden beliefs do not disappear all at once. Some return in moments of fragility, trying to reassert their hold. But every time we choose conscious observation, every time we try a new path even in the midst of fear, we weaken their strength. Little by little, the mind learns to recognize the difference between past and present, between an old interpretation and current reality. This learning makes room for awareness to move more freely, less conditioned. Revealing and transforming hidden beliefs is ultimately an act of trust. Trust that we can deal with the unknown that arises when old certainties dissolve. Trust that we are not prisoners of inherited narratives. Trust that by releasing the invisible filters, life presents itself with a wealth of possibilities far greater than we imagined. There are moments when life seems to send us messages through events that defy the logic of chance. Small encounters, phrases, or symbols that repeat in different contexts create the feeling that there is a hidden order guiding our steps. This phenomenon has been named synchronicity, but its essence is less a theoretical concept and more an intimate experience, hard to ignore when lived. It is not about ordinary coincidences, but events that arise charged with personal meaning, as if an invisible intelligence were stitching together the threads of our story. The power of synchronicity lies in its ability to pull us out of the linear perception of time. We usually think of life as a predictable sequence of causes and effects, but when an unexpected event appears laden with meaning, something in us awakens to the possibility that the universe does not function only like a mechanical machine. Suddenly, a casual conversation opens up an opportunity we have been seeking for months, or a book forgotten on a shelf brings exactly the answer we needed. These signs do not obey traditional reasoning, but they resonate so precisely that they can hardly be dismissed as mere chance. The intriguing thing is that synchronicity seems to arise more often when we are in states of greater openness and presence. When we let go of excessive control and allow ourselves to inhabit the unknown, we create space for unexpected connections to manifest. In this sense, synchronicity is not a trick of the universe to surprise us, but a kind of dialogue between individual consciousness and a larger field of possibilities. It points to an interconnection that transcends visible boundaries, suggesting that our thoughts, intentions, and inner states are in constant communication with external reality. Many accounts illustrate this dynamic. A person who reflects intensely on a difficult decision meets on the same day someone who spontaneously shares an almost identical story, offering clarity. Another, in the midst of doubt, repeatedly sees a word or image that seems to respond to the dilemma. These events do not guarantee that everything is resolved, but they offer clues, as if they were markers on an unknown trail. The meaning lies not only in the event itself, but in the way it connects to the interior of the one who experiences it. The risk is to interpret synchronicity as superstition or as blind confirmation of any desire. The true power of this phenomenon lies in serving as a mirror, reflecting what already pulses within us, but in a symbolic and unexpected way. Instead of seeking a guarantee in it, we can use it as an invitation to observe more carefully what is moving inside us. Each sign, each meaningful coincidence can be understood as an opening to a deeper dialogue with life. When we open ourselves to this language, we develop a different sensitivity to the flow of events. We begin to notice patterns that previously escaped us, to recognize that we are not isolated in our journeys. This perception strengthens the trust that there is a greater order supporting processes, even when we cannot see it clearly. It is as if we were sailing on a sea of symbols, and synchronicity were the wind that fills the sails, reminding us that we are not adrift. In practice, welcoming synchronicity is to exercise attentive listening. It is allowing ourselves to pause before an unexpected event and ask, what does this reveal about my path? Which part of me feels touched by this coincidence? The value lies less in the objective answer and more in the movement of self-reflection it provokes. Thus, synchronicity becomes a tool for self-knowledge and expansion, not an external oracle. There is also a transformative aspect in how this phenomenon alters our relationship with time. Instead of living as prisoners of haste and linearity, we begin to recognize that each moment contains invisible potentialities. A delay that seemed bothersome can become the exact condition for a decisive encounter. An unexpected change can open the way to something greater than any plan we might have made. Synchronicity invites us to relax in the face of the unforeseen and to see in it a possible manifestation of meaning. Deep down, living in tune with synchronicity is to trust that life is in constant dialogue with us. It is recognizing that each step does not occur in isolation, but in resonance with a broader fabric of relationships. When we cultivate this perception, existence becomes less random and more meaningful, even amid uncertainties. And the more we practice this openness, the more we realize that the extraordinary can reveal itself in the simplest situations, as long as we are attentive to the silent call that reality offers us. The human mind has the habit of constantly projecting itself. It relives the past in search of justifications or throws itself into the future, trying to predict results. This incessant movement means that we are rarely truly present to what is happening here and now. The practice of conscious observation arises as a key that brings us back to the direct experience of the moment, freeing us from the distortions created by automatic interpretations. When we observe with clarity, without trying to adjust reality to what we expect from it, we begin to notice nuances that previously went unnoticed. This form of presence is not passive. On the contrary, it requires active engagement with each moment. To be conscious means to make room to perceive not only external facts, but also internal reactions, the thoughts that arise, the emotions that intensify, the physical sensations that accompany each experience. This simple act of observing without judgment has a transformative effect, as it frees us from the automatism that drives most of our choices. When we practice conscious observation, we discover that much of suffering does not arise from reality itself, but from the stories we tell about it. A sideways look at work can be interpreted as rejection or criticism, but if we observe it without adding narratives, we may simply notice that the other person was immersed in their own thoughts. This difference between fact and interpretation makes room for more lucid responses instead of impulsive reactions. Conscious observation also reveals the interconnection between internal states and external events. By noticing the quality of our own breathing, for example, we perceive how it influences our stance in the face of challenging situations. Short, rapid breaths often accompany moments of anxiety, while a slower, deeper rhythm creates a state of greater clarity. Small adjustments noticed in the body are reflected in how we see the world, showing that reality is, in part, shaped by the level of attention we apply to it. This exercise, however, is not an escape from practical life. On the contrary, it is a way of entering it more wholly. When we are present, the simple act of walking to work, preparing a meal, or talking to someone gains a new density. Subtle details once ignored begin to emerge: the sound of footsteps on the ground, the smell of spices, the change in the other's tone of voice. These small perceptions remind us that life does not happen in an idealized future, but in the moment we are breathing now. Conscious observation also works as an antidote to the hidden beliefs we carry. When we notice repetitive thoughts without identifying with them, we can see how many of them are echoes of the past. This distinction weakens the power of internal narratives and makes room for new interpretations. It is as if, By observing the mind in action, we moved from hostages to witnesses, recovering the freedom to choose. A fascinating aspect of this practice is that it changes the quality of time. What seemed to be rushing begins to expand. Instead of living as prisoners of haste, we feel there is more space between one event and another. This space is where freedom settles, for in it, we can decide more consciously how to act. Life ceases to be an automatic sequence and becomes a field of present choices. From the perspective of quantum consciousness, observation not only records reality, but influences it. Just as in the experiment in which the act of observing alters the behavior of particles, in human experience, the quality of our attention transforms the scenarios in which we are involved. When we look at life with presence and openness, we not only see more but also participate differently in the unfolding of events. Reality begins to reflect the clarity of the awareness that contemplates it. The challenge lies in sustaining this practice in everyday life. It is easy to get lost again in automatisms and distractions, but each return to observation, even if brief, is a silent victory. Little by little, this return becomes more natural, until conscious observation is not just a technique, but a way of living. The world shows itself more alive, richer, and more aligned with what truly matters. And perhaps this is the most precious point. Conscious observation teaches us that we do not need to wait for great events to experience meaning. The extraordinary reveals itself in the simple when we are present. The universe ceases to be a distant backdrop and becomes a constant dialogue with what we feel, think, and choose to perceive. If this reflection has awakened in you the desire to practice more presence, I want to propose something simple. Try leaving a comment sharing a moment from your day when you managed to be truly attentive. It can be a deeper breath, a look you noticed, or any moment in which you felt clarity. And if this content made sense, like it so that more people can also open themselves to the experience of conscious observation. A large part of what we can be remains in a latent state, like seeds kept in silence, waiting for the right conditions to sprout. We call this dormant potentials. Talents, perceptions, inner strengths, and even ways of living that have not yet found space to manifest. These potentials do not disappear over time, but remain stored in deep layers of the mind and body, waiting for consciousness to awaken them. In childhood, many of these resources are more visible. Natural curiosity, expansive imagination, the ability to be enchanted by the simple. These are signs of potentials that often get lost with the demands of adult life. Little by little, we learn to adjust our behavior to fit social, professional, and family molds. In this adaptation, we set aside parts of ourselves that did not fit external expectations. The result is that we carry a reduced version of who we really are, as if we were living only a fraction of our true breadth. However, these potentials do not disappear. They remain present, sometimes manifesting in flashes, a sudden interest in something we never explored, a strong intuition amid routine, a creative urge that arises without warning. These are clues that life is trying to remind us of what can still blossom. The challenge lies in recognizing these signs and giving them room to grow, even when they seem out of step with ordinary logic. Quantum consciousness helps us understand that the future is not a linear repetition of the past. Each moment contains multiple possibilities, and dormant potentials are like doors that can be opened at any time. It is enough for attention and trust to turn toward them. There is no need to wait for ideal circumstances. Often, the simple act of honoring a forgotten interest already triggers a process of transformation. Consider, for example, someone who always felt affinity with music, but abandoned that calling to follow a more secure path. Decades later, upon playing an instrument again, something awakens not only in the artistic field, but in their whole perception of life. The music, once silenced, releases emotions, broadens sensitivity, and strengthens creative confidence. This awakening is not limited to art itself, but radiates into other areas, bringing vitality and clarity. This phenomenon shows that dormant potentials are not optional luxuries, but essential parts of our wholeness. When they are forgotten, we feel a kind of subtle emptiness, as if something were always missing, even amid external achievements. When they awaken, they fill that space with meaning, and reconnect us to a deeper dimension of ourselves. The key lies in attentive observation of everyday life. Often, potentials reveal themselves in seemingly trivial moments: the unexpected pleasure of teaching something to another person, the ease in finding creative solutions, the sense of flow when we practice a specific activity. These are indications that there is a natural talent asking to be cultivated. Ignoring them is like letting a fertile garden remain empty, while attending to these callings can transform the entire landscape of existence. Another important point is that the awakening of these potentials rarely happens without some discomfort. By bringing to light parts of ourselves that were hidden, we need to confront old beliefs, fears, and even the resistance of those around us. This discomfort, however, is a sign of growth. It is like the earth breaking so that the seed can sprout, a movement that requires energy, but that opens the way to something new and fuller. By welcoming dormant potentials, we also discover that they do not belong only to us individually. Each awakened talent becomes a contribution to the collective. A voice that finds the courage to express itself can inspire others to do the same. A cultivated creative skill can generate beauty or solutions that benefit many people. Thus, by awakening what was silenced, we take part in a larger network of transformation. Life constantly offers us chances to access these inner resources. An unexpected encounter, a reading, a dream, even a difficulty can serve as a trigger for something hidden to surface. What determines whether the potential will blossom is not the absence of obstacles, but the willingness to listen and act based on these signs. Deep down, dormant potentials are reminders that we are not finished. Each of us is a work in motion, always in the process of revealing new layers. When we accept this condition, we stop living merely as repetition and begin to live as expansion. The awakening of these potentials reminds us that life is larger than the sum of our routines, and that there is always something beyond what we already know waiting to emerge. Life has a curious way of teaching. Often, the deepest lessons do not come through grand speeches or perfect plans, but in unforeseen situations, apparently out of context. The unexpected, when looked at closely, carries the seed of transformations that would hardly be accessed by conscious choice. It is in these moments that we are reminded that existence is not only what we project, but also what presents itself without notice, challenging our patterns. A simple example: someone misses an important appointment because of a traffic delay. At first glance, the fact seems like nothing more than an annoyance, but upon looking calmly, they realize that this setback made them rethink how they organize their time or even their relationship with haste. In another scenario, an unexpected conversation with a stranger can bring clarity to a personal dilemma, revealing that life teaches not only through what we plan, but also through what surprises us. These unexpected lessons tend to have a particular strength because they break the barrier of control. When we are in charge, we tend to shape situations according to our beliefs and preferences. What comes from outside that field escapes predictability and forces us to deal with reality as it is. This confrontation can be uncomfortable, but it also opens space for new perspectives. Often, it is in this unstable terrain that insights capable of changing the course of a life are revealed. Quantum consciousness offers us an interesting lens to observe this process. If reality is composed of multiple possibilities that collapse before attention, then the unexpected is precisely the entry of a variable we had not considered. By welcoming this variable instead of resisting it, we expand the field of learning. The unexpected lesson is proof that life is not a closed script, but a constant dialogue between our intentions and the infinite field of possibilities that surrounds us. This does not mean that every unexpected event is pleasant. Many come in the form of crises, losses, or challenging situations. But even in these cases, there is something to be learned. A difficulty can reveal inner strengths we did not know. A loss can teach about detachment and redirect our attention to more essential aspects of life. Suffering, when crossed with awareness, often turns into wisdom. The unexpected, in this sense, is a stern but generous teacher, because it offers lessons that could not be acquired otherwise. It is important to note that these lessons do not appear ready-made. They need to be recognized. Conscious observation, practiced regularly, helps us perceive what is hidden in events. Without this attention, we risk interpreting everything merely as bad luck, injustice, or chance. With attention, however, each event can be seen as an opportunity for expansion. This shift in perspective transforms even painful situations into turning points, capable of leading us toward a more aligned life. Often these lessons come disguised as small details. A mistake made at work can become an opportunity to develop humility and collaboration. A missed meeting can create space to notice that there was accumulated fatigue, requiring a pause. Even an apparently banal conversation can carry a sentence that echoes for days, awakening deep reflections. The unexpected manifests in the gaps of everyday life, and its strength lies precisely in not being controllable. Accepting the unexpected as a natural part of the journey makes us more resilient. When we stop expecting everything to follow the plan, we reduce frustration in the face of the unforeseen. We begin to view each event as part of a larger flow, where even detours can contain meaning. This stance does not eliminate difficulties, but gives us tools to move through them with more balance and openness. The most surprising thing is that, as we become receptive to unexpected lessons, we begin to see life as a sort of silent teacher. Each event carries a teaching, even if hidden at first glance. It is up to us to cultivate the sensitivity to perceive what reveals itself beyond the surface. When we adopt this attitude, we stop fighting the unexpected and start walking with it, discovering that existence has its own wisdom, much greater than our need for control. Thus, unexpected lessons are not detours from life, but an essential part of it. They are invitations to leave the known zone, expand internal boundaries, and recognize that mystery also educates. And the more we accept this role of the unexpected, the more life shows itself as a weave of learnings that goes far beyond what we can plan. Fear is an ancient emotion, rooted in our biology as a protection mechanism. It alerts us to dangers, prepares the body to react, and keeps us attentive to survival. But while it has played an essential role throughout evolution, fear has also become an invisible barrier that limits our expansion. When unacknowledged, it turns possibilities into threats, reducing life to a narrow space where the new is seen with suspicion. The transition from fear to trust does not mean eliminating the natural instinct, but learning to reinterpret its presence and choose more broadly in the face of situations. Often fear does not manifest as evident panic, but in subtle nuances. It is in the hesitation before making an important decision, in the silence that avoids a necessary conversation, in the postponement of a project that has pulsed for years. These are silent forms of self-protection that, instead of saving us, keep us paralyzed. The curious thing is that these reactions arise even when there is no real danger, only the imagined threat of losing control or facing the unknown. Quantum consciousness offers a different lens to deal with this emotion. If reality is a field of possibilities, fear acts as a narrow focus of attention that drastically reduces what we can see. It makes us believe that there is only one way out, or that the situation is more rigid than it really is. Trust, on the other hand, broadens this field, allowing us to see alternatives previously invisible. The difference between being trapped in fear or nurturing trust is often the difference between collapsing a reality of limitation or making room for a reality of expansion. This transition begins with observation. Recognizing fear as a signal, not as a sentence, already changes the relationship with it. When we can pause before the sensation and investigate it with clarity, we realize that most of the time it carries old memories or future projections, but does not necessarily describe the present. This awareness gives us back the possibility of choice. We can continue conditioned by the emotion, or use it as a starting point for a different movement. Trust in this context is not naivety. It is not about denying risks or closing our eyes to difficulties. To trust is to recognize that even in the midst of uncertainty, there is invisible support that sustains us. It is to believe that we have internal resources and that life, in its complexity, is not only threat, but also a fertile field of possibilities. This state does not arise from superficial positive thinking, but from the practice of repeatedly living through moments in which the leap into the unknown resulted in learning, even when there was no control. In daily life, the passage from fear to trust can be seen in small gestures. A person who decides to open themselves to a new friendship, even while carrying fear of rejection, discovers that the encounter brings more lightness than they imagined. Someone who agrees to share their idea in a work environment realizes that others' feedback is not as threatening as fear anticipated. Each time we choose to cross the barrier of fear, we feed a memory of courage that strengthens trust. Little by little, this practice becomes a new internal foundation, capable of supporting broader choices. There is also a spiritual aspect to this transition. Fear is linked to the need for control, to guarantee results. Trust is born of surrender, of recognizing that we cannot predict every detail, but we can align ourselves with life in a broader way. It is when we accept that the unknown does not need to be an enemy, but an ally. This openness connects us to a force greater than individuality, allowing the experience to become less lonely and more integrated with the whole. The curious thing is that when we cultivate trust, the world responds differently. We begin to notice synchronicities, feel greater clarity in decisions, and recognize that many situations we feared were only mental projections. Trust creates a resonance that reorganizes our relationship with events, not because everything becomes easy, but because the internal posture changes the quality of the experience. The journey from fear to trust is continuous. It is not about reaching a final state in which we never feel fear again. It is about developing a skill, the ability to move through fear without letting it determine our steps. Each new situation offers the opportunity to choose again. And the more often we choose trust, the more it strengthens as a natural path for the mind and heart. Thus, true freedom is not in eliminating fear, but in recognizing that it does not need to be the guide of our life. Trust makes room for us to explore the unknown with more courage, transforming each uncertainty into a field of possibilities. And it is in this movement that life reveals its depth, reminding us that behind each fear, there is always the chance to discover a path that expands us. When we look deeply at the journey traveled, we realize that trusting in quantum consciousness is not adopting a distant theory, but learning to relate to life in a different way. The mind, which so often limits itself to the known, can become a portal to broader realities. Surrendering to the unknown makes room for the new to manifest. Hidden beliefs, when illuminated, stop binding us and turn into possibilities of choice. Synchronicity shows us that we are not isolated, but intertwined in a web of meanings. Conscious observation brings us back to the present moment, revealing that attention is creative power. Dormant potentials remind us that we still carry reserves of life waiting for expression. Unexpected lessons teach that even the unforeseen can be a teacher, and the movement from fear to trust frees us to live with more courage. All of this points in the same direction. Life is not a rigid line, but a field in constant dialogue with consciousness. Each choice to observe, to trust, and to open ourselves to mystery transforms the experience into something richer, more full of meaning. This is the strangeness we have spoken of from the beginning. By trusting in the power of consciousness, we discover that what seemed invisible was always present, only waiting for us to learn how to perceive it. And if you have come this far, I want to propose a simple gesture. Write in the comments the phrase "I trust" to mark that you walked to the end of this reflection. And if this content brought clarity or inspiration, subscribe to receive more experiences like this one and continue exploring, together with me, the living mysteries of consciousness.